But I did want to talk about something that we got into a little bit last week, which is where sonics are at in terms of saturation. You know, we've talked so much about saturation initially. Early on, and when we were chatting, there was lots of talk about not using compressors very much, using more saturation and limiters and transients and all these different ways. And so there was a lot of like saturation. We did a couple of hours on harmonics and saturation. And you and I were talking last week. I think we could just kind of get into it again because I love this topic.
Yeah.
Listening to records, I think you and I, not that the golden era of like low end and punch and mixing, but a golden era perhaps is about 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago.
Yep.
The hip hop and R&B of that era, especially like some of those Lil Jon, Usher, like Confessions.
Oh God, it's unreal.
Some of that like New York hip hop. There's a lot of amazing mixes that somehow feel more open and I think are not as like, I mean, I don't know the process. They're not saturated in the same way. I think they're maybe mixed potentially through some more analog gear, but not like a huge amount of Decapitator and Spectre and T-Rax and like little bits of, again, I don't know exactly where to start this conversation, but I
do. I've been thinking about this a lot in the last couple of days. And I practiced it on my Twitch live after we talked about it. I practiced it last week with the artist and the producer in the room where we turned off the mix bus and just saw what happened and just turned the speakers up. And it was unreal when you opened up the very minimal mix bus that I have that is just a clipper, basically getting like 4 to 6 dB of gain and just turned up the speakers, how much more dangerous the mix and the record sounded, how much more open. It was insane. It was just like the transients were jumping in a good way, like in a very interesting, like the producer's really great, you know. So what I was noticing, and did this again with the producer here yesterday, wrapping up an EP, where, you know, I had sent these mixes. We talked about this one live. I think I can, it's a Doechii record and Doechii's out, so I can just talk about the artist. It doesn't really matter what the song is necessarily. But, you know, I sent back these mixes and everyone was feeling them, but the producer wanted to do another pass at the 808 on this one record that I was really hyped on because it's so grimy. It's the one that I was playing against the Nicki Minaj record that I mentioned last week. That just, the mix was not as good as my mix from 4 years ago or 5 years ago, where I wasn't clipping the mix bus and I was mixing with headroom and I wasn't mixing much past. I was going through a phase where I was only doing -10 and like being really specific on that because it worked with Khalid, it worked with that Talk record, and it's on the radio, and it was a song of a summer, and it was a hit, and it had headroom, and it bumped, and all these things where I was like really confident that that was going to work. It didn't work all the time. People just wanted loud mixes. So I definitely couldn't get away with that for much, but I had a little bit of an ego around it, so I did it. So then, being this Doechii record against that, similar arrangement, similar sounds, but this one was like, my new mix was clipping and it sounded small compared to it. Like it hit hard, but had this faux hard hitting where the clipping makes it feel like it's aggressive. But when I put that Nicki Minaj record on, it was just going hard on the floor was shaking at Mike Miller's at the Atmosphere. And there was like the trunk would rattle differently. I just know it. Like my Tesla was going, like it was just objectively a better mix to me in a similar genre. Now it wasn't as energized and as like, there's something really grimy about Doechii versus this Nicki record. Nicki's a little cleaner. She's like a pop rapper. Doechii's a little bit harder in a certain sense. And it's a new artist. You're developing a sound. You're developing a character. Like I wasn't against the clipping. I just thought it was too far. So they wanted to go back and change the 808. So yesterday I had an opportunity to remix the song. And I just started from scratch basically. And I wound up giving myself a shit ton of headroom. I took the clipper off. I took everything off and I just lowered it. And I gave myself a lot of headroom. And, you know, I heard he just basically dropped an 808 on top of my already mixed song. And it just sounded ridiculous. Like it was just an absurd amount of 808. And there's no way that this record would be approved that way. But I heard the distortion that he wanted out of the 808. So instead of just making it louder, I sculpted that distorted character. He also referenced the Baby Keem song he produced in 2019 that he did and what the 808 sounded like and kind of how he got it there. And we talked about this, right? So I figured out how to get that upper harmonic into the 808 by distorting. Like when I came over to your studio that day and I just like turned the clipper on the 808 just to see what kind of upper harmonics can come. But I did it with an exciter and I did it in a multi-band way. So I only, hit above, I don't remember, it's like between 200 and 500.
Yeah, the low end's intact.
Whatever. The low end is intact and clean and I didn't hear any phasing, so I kind of liked it. But I was able to make this record go so hard, taking it from a -7 loud mix to a -10, and the fucking loft up here was shaking, and I was A/Bing with him, and he was like, bro. Like it's just, there's something about the feeling of when you actually get low end in an open sense. And what I've really dialed this into is it's arrangement, it's balances. He called it. He was like, dude, when I come over here and I listen, I don't really have that many notes because you're so good at getting balances. And I was like, that's an interesting comment to make because I've never heard a producer talk about balances, but that's what mixing is. Mixing always was about the balances. My friend Chris Tabron always talked about that. He's like, a great mix you can tell by balance. Like Tom Elmers is really good at balances. I don't always think he mixes like the most interestingly or the most current in a lot of ways, but his balances are always very cared for and considered. So nothing's fighting for space. So when you listen to those golden ages, we're referring to them records, not everything is loud. The hi-hats sit back a little bit. They're not competing for the vocal space, right? The 808, if there's a sample that also has bass in it, it's filtered up, and the 808's in its own pocket. Listen to a lot of Metro Boomin trap records. There's nothing in the 808, right? In that same space. So the 808 gets the beat. So you could turn things down around it, get the 808 loud. I'm sure like Alex Toomey can talk about this on working on some of his stuff, right? Like when you can turn things down so the 808 can come up, right? So when he sent me this stem and he was just like, yo, I want the 808 to be more like that. Well, the only way to do that is to turn everything down. And then I turned my speaker volume up and I had him in the room, and you're going back and forth on things and just getting that saturation in the right place. You're not getting it on your mix bus. You know what I mean? You're not getting it. We always talk about this, getting things all, heavy-handed in one place. So in order to make up gain now, I'm not doing it all with one clipper plugin. I'm deciding to just do like, if I'm clip gaining down, remember I have tubes on my mix bus. So if you're hitting tubes and transformers on your mix bus, you're going to soften sounds, oversaturating them. So I'm very much paying attention to where I hit my tubes, so I can hear those transients getting lost or not. So I might come down a substantial amount out of the box into the tubes just to get the right amount of sauce going on, and then I'll make up gain with like a Pro Q3. I'll just turn it up. Sometimes the plugin clips. I hate seeing a plugin red clip, but like if I don't hear it, not against it. But I usually turn up the Pro Q3 now. That's what I'm doing all week until it clips, until it hits that red, and then I go a step down from that. So I'm just getting pure gain with a clean plugin that is doing nothing except for turning up volume. And then I'm letting a clipper, right now I'm using the Fire the Clip clipper, but I'm going to go probably back and forth between the big clipper and the Fire the Clip. I think the big clipper handles low end better because you can, we talked about it, you can clip the low end differently. It's multi-band, threshold dependent clipping. So I might go back to that a bit. But the Fire the Clip, if you're not doing too much with it, actually sounds incredible and keeps everything very intact. It just doesn't handle low end great if you're using it heavy-handedly, and it could be because there's a built-in low cut or high pass. As you go more to get more out of it, it has to filter up low end automatically, and it could be encoded in that. I wanted to actually ask Acoustica about that because it sounds like that. When I go back to my couch after I turn it up a little bit, I feel like there's less low end just because. So I'm looking for a sweet spot just around my rant out here. I'm looking for a sweet spot of where the floor of my studio shakes and I get the upper harmonic presence on the 808 on the phone at the same time. Because all of those records that we're talking about have it. Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe has it. Like there are certain records that have that, and my floor in the loft goes crazy. And if my floor is not going crazy, that means there's not enough low end. And the only way that works is when it's sub, like, it's around -10, -9 on LUFS.
Well, it's one of the things I think we're really talking about is what's happened in the last, I don't know how many years, it's just increasingly over time, is that mixers have started to focus more on loudness than they used to. I think, trying to basically deliver things that compete with a mastered record. And in my mind, we've talked about mastering a bit before, and I'm going to have a mastering engineer on at some point, either Dale or somebody else. I like the idea of not mixing so loud, keeping it open, and then letting a mastering engineer figure out how to get the right amount of loudness, because that's literally what they're supposed to do, is figure out how to make your mix, which is open and big and not as loud, and get it to the place where it makes the most sense without sacrificing. And as much as we would like to think we have all the same skills and a bunch of can get the same gear and that sort of thing, that's why you hire somebody at, several $100s a song to spend, less than an hour probably going in and doing the thing that they do over and over and over, tens of thousands of times. It's, the era we're talking about has a big overlap with the quote unquote loudness wars, was pre-streaming, where everybody was trying to get the loudest possible thing out of digital. And so there were records that sounded clipped, but like you said, the clipping, like the digital clip just going above zero, if it's done correctly, is a way to get loudness that doesn't add the harmonic saturation, which is nice a lot of times, but also can soften your sound and reduce the openness of the low end. So the idea of actually just lowering the LUFS, lowering the volume, and not trying to get so much squeezed into the dynamic range, and actually letting your mix be open, I think it might be time for quite a bit more of that. I mean, I love what
I'm going to keep trying it.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.